The expression of volunteerism is deep-rooted in our values, our bayanihan spirit, all for one and one for all. Let's do the put your finger down challenge, volunteer version. Put your finger down if you volunteered in teaching kids or other youth. Next, put your finger down if you volunteered in any cleanup drive. Next, put your finger down if you voluntarily donated for calamity-stricken community. Next, put your finger down if you shared your portions to the needy and homeless. Next, put your finger down if you voluntarily assisted an elderly. Sixth, put your finger down if you have organized a charity program or feeding program. Next, put your finger down if you have participated in a medical mission. Next, put your finger down if you have participated in Philippine Red Cross blood donation. Next, put your finger down if you have volunteered as a member or officer of community board. Last, put your finger down if you are willing to be a volunteer at times you are needed without any compulsion. That's it. Good afternoon, everyone. We are the Group 4, and today we will report about the Volunteer Act of 2007. First, what is the Republic Act number 9418? Republic Act number 9418 is an act institutionalizing a strategy for rural development, strengthening volunteerism, and for other purposes. This act is also known as the Volunteer Act of 2007. This act began and held in Metro Manila on Monday, the 24th day of July 2006. This act shall be the policy of the state to promote the participation of the various sectors of the Filipino society and, as necessary, international and foreign volunteer organizations in public and civic affairs, and adapt and also strengthen the practice of volunteerism as a strategy in order to attain national development and international understanding. The inculcation of volunteerism as a way of life shall rekindle in every Filipino the time-honored tradition of bayanihan to foster social justice, solidarity, and sustainable development. In order to carry out the foregoing policy, the government shall pursue the attainment of the following goals and objectives. First is to provide policy framework on volunteerism that shall underscore the fundamental principles necessary to harness and harmonize the broad and diverse efforts of the voluntary sector in the country into an integrative and effective partnership for local and national development, as well as international cooperation and understanding. Second is to provide a conducive and enabling environment for volunteers and volunteer service organizations by setting mechanisms to protect volunteers' rights and privileges, and give due recognition to highlight the roles and contributions to society. And lastly is to provide an effective institutional mechanism to strengthen the role of the Philippine National Volunteer Service Coordinating Agency to perform its mandates and to oversee the implementation of this act. Now we're going to talk about the definition of terms. Volunteerism, it refers to an act involving a wide range of activities, including traditional forms of mutual aid and development interventions, and it is the use or involvement of volunteer labor, especially in community services, that provides enabling and empowering environment both on the part of the beneficiary receiving and the volunteer rendering the act. Next is volunteer. It refers to an individual or group who, for reasons arising from their social, developmental, business, and corporate orientation, commitment, or conviction, contribute time, service, and resources, whether on full-time or part-time basis, to a just and essential social development cause. Next is the volunteer service organization. It refers to a local or foreign group that recruits, trains, deploys, and supports volunteer workers to programs and projects implemented by them or by other organizations or any group that provides services and resources, including but not limited to information, capability building, advocacy, and networking for the attainment of common good. Voluntary sector. It refers to those sectors of Philippine society that organizes themselves into volunteers to take advocacy and action primarily for local and national development as well as international cooperation and understanding. Its primary purpose is to create a social impact rather than profit. It is often called the third sector, civil society, or the not-for-profit sector. Now we're going to talk about the roles and modalities of volunteerism in the private sector. First is the volunteerism in the academy includes but is not limited to provision of technical assistance and sharing of technology within the academic circle, target communities and other clienteles, and the upgrading of the quality of education and curriculum methodologies while providing career enhancement and exposure to the volunteers. Next is the volunteerism in the corporate sector. As an expression of corporate social responsibility and citizenship, this, sec- this sector refers to activities recognized by the company, where employees give their time, skills, and resources in the service of the company's internal and external communities. They include activities that are not limited to employee giving of material resources to specific causes, employee employee-led fundraising, one-time outreach activities, and environmental campaign. Next is volunteerism by not-for-profit organization. Includes but is not limited to provision of complementary service delivery and human resource development in underserved communities as well as an advocacy and articulation of the cause of the disadvantaged and vulnerable groups. Uh, the roles and modalities of volunteerism by foreign volunteer organizations. This includes but is not limited to provision of technical assistance, not locally accessible in priority development areas within the framework of technical cooperation and socio-cultural exchange.
In continuation of the previous reporter's discussion, we will now identify the key men in management of respective volunteer organizations and describe their roles as mandated by the law. First, we will tackle about the role of the government. The government shall coordinate, facilitate, and encourage the participation of the voluntary sectors in the promotion, utilization, and recognition of volunteerism in national development and international cooperation. This shall be achieved through the provision of enabling and conducive environment for volunteer work. As we all know that the Philippine government gives paramount importance to people's participation as prime movers of development. Say for example the contact tracers. They are retracing the steps of coronavirus cases in order to have them and the people they interacted with placed under quarantine. This was actually suggested by the Department of Health, and the DILG implements the rules and the laws in qualification for those contact tracers. As you can see, in today's environment, we are really in dire need for volunteer works. We are in shortage of medical professionals and even the contact tracers. Just for your information, the National Volunteer Month is usually celebrated in the month of December as per Presidential Proclamation number 55, series of 1998. This event would recognize or will remind those volunteers who have been serving the society or the country. And that government agency that mandates to promote and coordinate volunteer programs and services in the Philippines is the Philippine National Volunteer Service Coordinating Agency, or the PNVISCA. The PNVISCA is actually created by the Executive Order number 134 as amended, shall undertake the implementation and execution of the provisions of the Act. This is actually under the administrative supervision of the National Economic and Development Authority, or the NEDA. PNVISCA takes the lead in advocating and recognizing the contributions of the volunteers to nation building and international cooperation. So to know their functions, here are the mandates of the PNVISCA. We have 8 as presented by the law. First, they will review and formulate policies and guidelines concerning the National Volunteer Service Program, consistent with national development priorities. Next would be coordinating and monitoring and evaluate the National Volunteer Service Program in order that volunteer assistance may fit into the national development goals. Third is to act as a clearinghouse for matters pertaining to international volunteer services. Clearinghouse or intermediaries. They collect and distribute materials or information or form to facilitate the exchange of payments, securities, or derivative transactions in order to reduce the risk of a member firm failing to honor its trade settlement obligations. Next is to develop and implement the prototypes and models of volunteering for adoption by institutions and communities. Fifth, provide technical services and support for capability building of volunteers and volunteer organizations. They will also undertake advocacy or advocate for the promotion and recognition of volunteerism as a tool for development. Another is to establish and maintain a national network of volunteer organizations and serve as a liaison between and among local and foreign governmental private voluntary organizations, including the United Nations Volunteers. UNV is a United Nations organization that contributes peace and development through volunteerism worldwide. And lastly, they also administer all the PNVISCA funds from all sources, including foreign aid, in accordance with accounting and auditing requirements. For this purpose, the Executive Director of the PNVISCA shall submit an organizational plan upon advice of the multi-sectoral advisory body to the Department of Budget and Management. As you can see, it is illustrated in this diagram. The multi-sectoral advisory body will advise the Executive Director of PNVISCA, which is as of present, Mr. Donald James Ligawe, and submit the organizational plan to the Department of Budget and Management, or the DBM. Here's the organizational structure of the PNVISCA. As you can see, the Office of the Director usually, is assisted by the Multi-Sectoral Advisory Body and the National Volunteer Month Steering Committee. The National Volunteer Month Steering Committee are composed of representatives from the government and private sector in planning and organizing the events. So these government and private sectors will be discussed later. And the multi-sectoral advisory body will act as the policy advisory body. And this will be discussed later on. Under the office of the director are the Chief Administrative Officer for Administrative, Financial, and Management Division, the Chief Volunteer Service Officer for the Policy, Advocacy, and Technical Services Division, and lastly, the officer in charge for the Program Coordination, Monitoring, and Evaluation Division. So, the one that assisted the PNVISCA is the Multi-Sectoral Advisory Body, or the MSAB. It is created under the Executive Order number 635 and reconstitutes with the following members. First is the NEDA, or the National Economic and Development Authority. As mentioned previously, NEDA administratively supervised PNVISCA. Next would be the Department of Education, who manages and governs the Philippine system of basic education. So they are mostly for education programs. The DFA, or the Department of Foreign Affairs, contributes to the enhancement of national security and protection of the territorial integrity, and upon the request of PNVISCA, the DFA will authorize the Philippine Embassy to issue appropriate visa to foreign volunteers. Next, we have the DOJ. The DOJ upholds the rule of the law of the Philippines. They serve as a legal counsel and prosecution arm. Next would be the DILG, or the Department of the Interior and Local Government. They promote peace and order, ensure public safety, and strengthen the capability of LGUs to effectively deliver basic services to the citizenry. The SWD, or the Department of Social Welfare and Development, for the protection of the social welfare rights of Filipinos and to promote the social development. We have the CHED, or the Commission on Higher Education. It's a key agency mandated to promote quality higher education and to ensure accessibility to those who may not be able to afford it. So, to those who haven't known, that the DepEd covers the elementary, secondary, and non-formal education, while the CHED is for higher education and TESDA administering post-secondary, middle-level manpower training and development. We also have this Presidential Management Staff, or PMS, the Office of the President. This is a primary government agency responsible or tasked to manage the development and formulation of projects and policies of the President. They provide technical assistance and advice to the President. Now, there are also representatives from the corporate sector, the private academic sector, and the not-for-profit sector. In the corporate sector, or in the business sector, we have the example of PLDT, or the Philippine Long Distance Telephone Company. For the corporate social responsibility, we also have the Code NGO, or the Caucus of Development NGO networks, or non-government organizations for social development, and the Association of Foundations in Information Management Activities. In the private academic sector, we have, as an example, the COCOPEA, or Coordinating Council of Private Educational Association. The private sectors are important in view of the rich experiences and the valuable insights of the sector in the field of volunteerism. We have the not-for-profit sector, or the non-profit sector. They are organizations that are formed explicitly to benefit the public good or the philanthropic purposes. They are tax-exempt charities or other public service organizations. An example of the non-profit organizations would be the Gawad Kalinga Community Development Foundation, or the GK, whose mission is to eradicate poverty and restore human dignity of the poor. We also have the Amnesty International. Philippines is a non-profit organization for the global movement to let all people enjoy human rights. We also have the Red Cross, the most popular volunteer organization in the Philippines. It aims to help people through its different services. They participate in national blood, disaster management, safety, health, social, and youth service. All member government agencies shall be represented at least by an assistant secretary, while the private sector agencies shall be represented at least by their highest executive officers. The government agencies shall be permanent members, while the representatives from the private sector shall serve for a 2-year term. The chair of the MSAB shall be elected from among the members of the body, the PNVISCA executive director being an ex officio member, or in Latin word it means from the office, is a member of a body who is part of it by virtue of holding another office. So they hold that position or membership due to the power or influence of one's office and not by election or appointment. So this executive director will serve as the permanent vice chair. to serve as resource persons on volunteerism as the need arises. The MSAB may call on representatives of other government agencies or the private sector. MSAB have the following functions. They provide advice in formulation of the policies and guidelines for the National Volunteer Service Program. Of course, they are the policy advisory body. They also provide consultative and technical advisory services on volunteer matters. They also serves as a forum or a place where issues are discussed to enhance and strengthen linkages between and among volunteer groups and communities.
So lastly, we will tackle about the Section 12 of Republic Act 9418 or Volunteer Act of 2007, which is the special provision. Establishment of a national volunteer infrastructure and forum. The PNVSCA or the Philippine National Volunteer Service Coordinating Agency aims to establish a national registration and networking system to improve coordination among volunteers and volunteer organizations, particularly in sharing and complementing volunteering information, experiences, and resources. Prioritizing a functional, appropriate, and inclusive volunteering infrastructure enables citizens to become agents of change and drivers of their own development. Volunteering infrastructure aims to catalyze the mobilization of volunteers, the support to volunteers, and the creation of volunteer opportunities. Integration of volunteerism in the basic and higher education curriculum. The DepEd and the CHED shall integrate volunteerism as part of the curriculum in basic and higher education to raise the consciousness of the youth and develop the culture of volunteerism among the citizenry. The Volunteer Act specifically calls for integrating volunteerism in the education curriculum. This proposal will encourage academic institutions to continuously devise ways to effectively teach and practice the value of volunteerism. Such integration provides students with a volunteering arena by which they can channel their idealism and vigor into something worthwhile. Volunteerism and academic service learning are considered important components in the educational process for building a stronger democracy. Emphasis on curricular and extracurricular means of moving students towards civic engagement has become a focal point of teaching and learning in elementary, secondary, and post-secondary educational institutions. Important reason why volunteering among basic and higher education students should be examined is that volunteering could be a measure of higher education efficiency. Volunteering, just like higher education itself, helps students' academic development, other life skill development factors, and last but not least, civic consciousness and responsibility. Establishment of volunteer program in national government agencies and local government units or LGUs. National government agencies and LGUs shall establish volunteer programs in their respective offices to promote and encourage volunteering in government programs and projects as well as enjoin government employees to render volunteer service in social, economic, and humanitarian development undertakings in the community. Government agencies are ordered to establish and implement volunteer programs on top of their regular mandate and functions in order to promote the value of volunteerism in the public sector. The agencies must also submit annual volunteering initiatives and activity reports to the Philippine National Volunteer Service Coordinating Agency or the PNVSCA. The volunteer program should provide opportunity for state employees to express and realize their personal motivation and desire to help others, especially the undeserved and marginalized sectors of society. Recognition and incentives to volunteers. Government agencies and non-government organizations, or the NGOs implementing volunteer programs, are encouraged to develop and provide volunteers recognition and incentive package which may include, but not limited to allowance, insurance, training and the grant of privileges and status to Filipino overseas volunteers at par with Filipino overseas workers. Incentives are intended to grab people's attention and act as a carrot to drive action. While there is an obvious overlap with recognition and rewards, incentives are intended to coax individuals to move through the decision-making process so that they take action and increase participation, incorporate giving and volunteering programs. Once an action is taken, it should be rewarded. While rewards sometimes act as an incentive, inviting people to consider new opportunities and try new things, rewards generally serve to reinforce and affirm existing behaviors. Rewards may also be categorized as employee benefits. For example, volunteer paid time off, volunteer grants, match giving. While encompassing both incentives and rewards, recognition primarily refers to the ways in which employee volunteers are acknowledged for their contributions to the community or their individual leadership. Recognition may be used to establish middle management support and increase trust as the program grows. Recognition is important to your volunteer program because it will only increase volunteer satisfaction and willingness to further participate in your organization. They will have a sense of belonging and feeling of accomplishment. This in turn will result in productivity. Volunteers are more likely to stay involved with your organization if they feel appreciated for the work they do and feel connected to your organization. Visa privileges for foreign volunteers resources. Foreign volunteers approved for assignment by the PNVSCA, as well as their legal dependents, may be entitled to visa with multiple entry privileges and corresponding exemption from visa and immigration fees and other related processing application fees or charges. Foreign nationals already in the Philippines who have been approved for volunteers assignment by the PNVSCA may avail of the above visa category and privileges upon endorsement by the PNVSCA to the DOJ. All foreign volunteer organizations wishing to send volunteers to the Philippines should first register with the Philippine National Volunteer Service Coordinating Agency or the PNVSCA. It will be the PNVSCA who will request clearance and authority to issue the Special Non-Immigrant Visa from the Department of Foreign Affairs or DFA in Manila. Upon request of the PNVSCA, the DFA will authorize the Philippine Embassy to issue the appropriate visa to the foreign volunteer. It is only upon receipt of the said authorization from DFA that the Philippine Embassy can accept and process the visa application of the foreign volunteer.